elected officials, one Democrat, one Republican, talking about the implications of the cuts that are being proposed by the Republicans in order to save money. Really, the cuts that Republicans are proposing are designed to increase the tax debt or the tax cuts for billionaires. And remember, we had spoken last year extensively about the fact that in 2017, I believe, maybe 2019, under 2017, they had passed a $1.9 trillion tax cut for billionaires and millionaires. Hi, YouTube. Welcome. You're joining us while we're in the middle of our segment. We just heard two clips that were outlining basically the amount of spending that everyone in the Doge reality is bragging about. The Lost Boys of the Confederacy have been hunting for this money. And what we learned is that if you were to get rid of 40,000 federal employees, that accounts to 1 day of borrowing in the amount of borrowing that the American government is engaged in. If you were to get rid of all the stadium subsidies, because everyone talks about stadium subsidies, personally, I'm not a fan of stadium subsidies, so I get it. That would give us 7 seconds of borrowing. If we were talking about the Department of Education salaries, if you got rid of every single person in the Department of Education, you would save 9 hours worth of borrowing. If you got rid of healthcare for undocumented immigrants, you would save 9 hours worth of borrowing. If you got rid of foreign aid, you would get rid of 1 week's worth of borrowing. So the idea that Republicans are seriously proposing tax cuts or cuts in our spending is redonkulous, because the cuts that they are proposing are not going to amount to the approximately $4 trillion that they are going to need in order to make the tax cuts for billionaires extensive and permanent. So let's back up a little bit because there's a lot of news to get into. I want to break it all down. I also do want to say really quickly as we're getting started, we found out that the Lurie Daniel Favors show here on SiriusXM has been renewed for another 2 years. We are coming up on our anniversary. Yes. Thank you for the applause. We are coming up on our 4th year. We're turning 4 this weekend. On the 15th is our anniversary date. We got started in 2021 after Laura Coates made her way out of the Urban View channel onto CNN. And you guys may recall, I auditioned. There was a 2-week audition period, myself and Ida Rodriguez, and the people spoke, and I've been sitting behind this microphone ever since. So we have been renewed for another 2 years. So all the haters who like to show up in the YouTube live and behind their keyboard, sorry suckers, we still gonna be here for another 2 years. And so yes, I just wanted to get that information out because it makes me very, very happy as well. But let's get into the news for today, because in addition to the cuts that we're going to talk about, did you guys know that apparently America's going vegan? Yeah, America's going vegan. We have in today's edition of the Financial Times, hopefully you guys can see that, there is an article entitled "Wisconsin Dairy Farmers Warn the Sector Will Collapse Without Foreign Labor." Now, you may have seen there's a whole lot of media coverage of these deportation efforts where they are now taking people who are not even accused of being criminals and literally telling their family members, we're sending them to Miami, we're sending them to Florida. They're really being sent to Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo. And so the idea that you're going to engage in these massive deportations is something that really helped to drive the right wing, really helped to drive the Republican Trump voters. But what we now learn is that according to the reports, and this is important, according to the news, Financial Times reporting, that Wisconsin dairy farmers have warned that the entire dairy farm sector is going to collapse without foreign labor. According to one dairy farmer, John Rosenau, he says that if Donald Trump deports all the undocumented aliens, Americans will have to get used to a whole new diet. He says that if there's no immigrant labor, there's no milk, there's no cheese, there's no butter, there's no ice cream. We'll all have to go vegan. Now, I have been working on becoming more vegetarianly inclined. I'm not there yet, but apparently if they were to do what they say they're going to do and round up all of the migrants and who are actually the people who do the work in this country of picking our food and making sure that we get it on our tables, then we're all going to be going vegan because there'll be no one to sustain that industry. According to the reports, this area of Wisconsin, which voted for Donald Trump, so the FAFO era is continuing. This area of Wisconsin, the state went for Donald Trump. According to the reports, the farmer says that he is almost entirely reliant on foreign workers, almost entirely reliant. He says, I had a lot fewer worries. Oh, I'm sorry, let me put this in the right voice. I had a lot fewer worries before Trump got elected, and now we're in a whole new world. Yeah. We're in a world where you voted for somebody who told you what they were going to do and you thought it was going to happen to everybody else but you. But now it is happening to you. According to the reports, the moves to deport massive amounts of people, those moves have gone down well with Trump's base, but the agricultural sector has warned it cannot function without immigrant labor. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I thought Americans said that they wanted these jobs, right? I thought people said that they were going to, they wanted the migrants to leave because the migrants were taking good jobs. Whether they be black jobs, white jobs, they're just taking the jobs. Well, according to the report, they are worried now because if they lose access to their workforce, then they're going to have to rely on Americans. Do you know why they're worried about relying on Americans? Let's read. Let's keep reading. It says, let's say the people in Washington could wave a magic wand and make all those people, the migrants, disappear. You'd have dead cows piling up outside the dairy farms. The industry would die a horrible death within 48 hours because no one would be here to slaughter the cows, let alone milk them. Now, I am not a math major. I went to law school because I could not hack it with math. I'm reevaluating my relationship with numbers even as we speak because I'm raising 2 children. Howsoever, what I am aware of is that we have approximately 330 some odd million Americans in this country, many of whom are unemployed, who should be able to help make sure that we don't have a whole bunch of dead cows slaughtering up or lining up because nobody can milk them, let alone take care of them. However, here's what happens when you rely on Americans to handle your dairy farm industry. They said that Rosenau, that's one of the farmers in a town that voted for Donald Trump, in a state that went for Donald Trump. Rosenau now questions whether any native-born Americans would be prepared to work on his farm. He said he was at his wit's end before starting to employ foreign workers in 1998. He has been employing foreign workers, many of whom are undocumented, since 1998. He continues. The turning point was an incident in the 1990s when a U.S.-born worker turned up for a job. This is a white man. A white man turned up for a job. A white American man turned up for a good American job on a good white American-owned farm. And what he said was, when the white man got out the car, all these cans of beer fell out when he opened the car door. I rang one of his references, and they said he'd never call him back to work. So remember when Vivek Ramaswamy told y'all that American culture was inferior? Remember when Vivek Ramaswamy was like, y'all can't, Americans like have a foolish culture that loves prom kings and queens and football, but doesn't actually like hard work, doesn't actually learning. And Vivek Ramaswamy told y'all that while y'all was making fun of the immigrants and the blacks and the browns who do the work of studying hard, that while Americans, white Americans were doing all that, that they were actually sportified an inferior culture, a culture that was not ready for work, was not ready for prime time, and would not be able to handle the mathematical capabilities that were going to be necessary for you to succeed. Well, apparently, it's not just math. It's not just the H-1B visas. Apparently, white American workers are not good, according to Vivek Ramaswamy and the white farmers who don't want to hire them. American white workers aren't good for a lot of things. And this might be because they participate in cultures, not all, we have righteous, but they largely, as a group, participate in cultures where essentially they don't learn things. They don't read. They don't like any history that makes them feel uncomfortable. And little Timmy's going to come home and wondering why it was that his grandma and his Meemaw and Pat was in the picture of the lynching that he saw at school. They don't like confronting the realities of American history, and they don't like challenging themselves to learn things. We're going to talk about education in just a minute. But according to the reports, y'all listen to this. According to a survey by the National Council of Agricultural Employers in 2020, out of the 97,691 seasonal agricultural jobs that were advertised from March to May of that year, do you want to know how many Americans applied for these jobs? I'm telling you, there are 97,691 positions available. Do you want to know how many Americans applied for these jobs? 337. Like 337 Americans applied for these jobs. And yet these Americans are the very same people who want to get rid of the migrants because the migrants are taking good jobs. There's jobs available right now. You can go on to Wisconsin where the wind was blowing at 50 miles an hour. Go on. And pick the cotton or do whatever it is that you want other people to do that you're not willing to do. Now, when you talk to some of the migrants themselves, what's also important for you to know is the following. According to one of the migrants who's there, undocumented, Roberto Tecpile, he says that if I am deported, I'll just go home to where my family is. He's a native of the Mexican state of Veracruz, and he has worked on this farm for the past 10 years. He says the people who are going to suffer the most are the business owners who will lose a lot of money. Now, his son, Kevin, who's also a migrant, is much more combative. And he said the following: we should all just say fine and leave this country, and they'll see what happens. How much are your eggs? How much are you guys paying for eggs right now? It's pretty expensive, no? Yeah, there was even a run on eggs at Costco, where I'm now a new member, happy member. But this is what's happening in the realities of Donald Trump's America. Now, in addition to that, today we also have Linda McMahon, who is not an educator, who is up for sitting in the seat of leading the Department of Education. Now, what you need to know about Linda McMahon is that, according to NPR, she is best known for leading the WWE and helping to build it into a multi-billion-dollar business. She also, for 2 years under Donald Trump's first term, helped to lead the Small Business Administration. Now, what you should definitely know is that because she's being nominated to sit in the seat of the Department of Education head, she has absolutely very little background in education. She, for 1 year, served as Connecticut State Board of Education. She actually said, she was reported as having said that she thought she had a teaching certificate because back in the 70s and the 80s, she used to substitute teach. And as a substitute teacher, she thought that meant that she had a teaching certificate. This is the woman that they are now putting to lead up the head of the Department of Education, a department that they're also planning to demolish and to destroy. According to the National Education Association, the NEA, they talk about today in an article that they released some of the dangers that are going to be confronted, or that American people are going to confront if they are able to move forward and destroy the Department of Education, as Donald Trump says he wants to do, because that was in Project 2025. Isn't it amazing how every single day, everything he talks about is directly related to Project 2025, which he said during his administration he was not for. He did not believe in it. He thought it was terrible, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And yet, surprisingly, he's doing everything he can to employ people in positions who were directly related to Project 2025. But here's what you need to know is at risk when it comes to the Department of Education. Special education is on the chopping block. 95% of students with disabilities attend public schools. I know a lot of people want to talk about charters and vouchers, whatnot, but we understand that vouchers and the charter system largely was created after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, which said that you could not have separate but equal schools. And racist white Americans decided to wholesale close a whole bunch of schools because they did not want little Timmy and little Jenny to have to be educated with the blacks. And they reopened these private religious schools that under the auspices of white nationalism and Christianity. And what happened was they wanted to then be able to take the money that used to go to fund their public schools to fund their religious schools. But the federal government was like, no, Cletus, we are non-racist country anymore. And so technically, now that we have a ban on segregation, you're not going to be able to use them public school dollars to fund your racist white supremacist school that you only opened up because you didn't want your little Timmy and Jenny being educated with the blacks. So that's why we understand the genesis of voucher programs and charter schools. Not to say all of them operate that way. And in fact, I think that if the global majority were intelligent about this moment, we would be thinking about our own religious potential schools, like the religion of Kwanzaa. And maybe we open our own schools under this sort of new regime that's coming up. But we'll talk about that in the days and weeks to come. Special education is on the chopping block. And by special education, I'm talking about all of the services. We talked about Section 504 yesterday. All of the services that children who have disabilities, who have learning disabilities, physical disabilities, who make up about 14% of all public school students. When you get rid of the Department of Education, you're getting rid of the mechanisms that are going to allow that department to ensure that all children get access to education. Now, what's also interesting is that Donald Trump and elongated Muskrat, the real president, did y'all see? We'll talk about Elon's son another time. But essentially, they have talked about the fact that recently, out of the top 40 nations, America ranks 40th in education when it comes to our international measurements. And they have then said that they want to use that to further support their effort to destroy the Department of Education. The challenge, however, is that curriculum, teacher hiring, teacher salary, the amount of money that's spent per pupil, that's not decided by the federal Department of Education. That's decided by your state's Department of Education. So they're using the failed realities at the state level to justify eradicating the Department of Education at the federal level. College affordability. Also on the chopping block. Most of the careers that are going to require you to, or going to compensate you well, are going to require some form of post-secondary education. However, students and families are now funding the bulk of higher education costs. According to the NEA, they have been advocating for the cancellation of college debt. And because of the Biden administration's executive orders that were able to cancel debt, about 48 million borrowers were able to find their student loan debts canceled. However, when you get rid of the Department of Education, you're getting rid of the capacity to be able to, one, provide federal supports and financial aid for people who are going to college, and you're getting rid of the capacity to ensure that the amount of debt that we're taking on is going to be just. When it comes to LGBTQ students, when it comes to students who are not a part of the white student majority in this country, the federal Department of Education is also where you had equity programs that were being driven by federal policy. And at the federal level, if they were saying things like, you're not going to be able to discriminate against Black students, and if you do, you're not going to be able to get federal dollars, they were able to hold a carrot and a stick to make sure that states like Mississippi, which have done everything that they could to destroy the Black Black majority cities in their state, for example, Jackson, Mississippi, capital of the state of Mississippi. And we have an interesting conversation coming up tomorrow with one of the state senators there. Shout out to State Senator Blackman, which you guys will be able to hear tomorrow. But when we look at what happened in Mississippi, when Brett Favre was stealing money from the poor white people in order to build his daughter a bigger volleyball stadium at the school that she went to, when in the state of Mississippi, we learned that the water that was so awful there and was so poisonous there, part of the reason it was being funneled into people's houses was because the state level government refused to allow access to the federal dollars that had been sent to rectify the problems with the water in Mississippi and Jackson, Mississippi. That was blocked at the state level. When it comes to education, the federal government is able to say, if you do those things, you're not going to get access to this to the infrastructure and to the dollars that we send to your states. Once you get rid of the Department of Education, that's it. School nutrition and school meals. Child nutrition is a really important thing. Have you ever tried to learn while you're hungry? Have you ever tried to do anything while you are hungry? Now, we know that free breakfast and free lunch programs were not something that the Department of Education started. That started with the Black Panthers, who were providing free breakfast and free lunch programs for students because they recognize that before we can talk to you about politics, we got to make sure that your basic needs are being met. And so then the Department of Education, after it was subsequently created, became instrumental in making sure that they were providing funds for school lunches and for school nutrition. 1 in 6 children, according to the NEA, 1 in 6 children lack consistent access to food necessary to fuel their bodies and their minds. They get that from school. The meals that they get at home are important. That's why we have SNAP programs, but they're about to cut SNAP, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. These are just a fraction of the things that are at risk because Donald Trump is trying to hire Linda McMahon, who has absolutely no background sufficient enough to run a school, let alone the Department of Education, to dismantle the Department of Education. And then all of us are going to have to figure out what the hell that means next. So that's the Department of Education. In addition to that, we got word of the budgetary cuts that the Republicans are proposing. Now, for those of you who are on YouTube, you probably, hold on, let me go back to the window. You probably can't see this too well, but I'm holding it up. And one day we're going to figure out how to do this via Zoom so I can just share my screen. We don't know how to do that yet. But this is a chart by the DCCC that went out. And the question the chart is asking is, how will the GOP tax plan impact you? Now, some of you are doing very, very well. I got to be honest with you. I am blessed. I'm in a 2-parent household. We both have sustainable income. God has been good. Financially, the little girl who lived in a shelter and who understood what it meant to stand in lines to get government cheese and powdered milk, powdered eggs, God has been good. And I'm grateful for that. Howsoever, what I'm saying that for is to say that I'm personally going to be okay according to this tax plan. My family is going to be okay according to this tax plan. If only that were all that mattered. It's not all that matters. So according to the tax plan, if you make 300, and it's a flow chart, if you make $360,000 or more per year, raise your hand if you make $360,000 more per year, or put it in the chat. If you make $360,000 more per year, if yes, your taxes are going to decrease substantially under this proposed plan that the Republicans are putting forward. If you make more than $914,900 a year, I'm not in that category, not at all. God has been good, but God has not blessed me in that particular way. I don't even know if that is a blessing technically. It's kind of like robbing the people. But if you make more than $914,900 a year, then your taxes are going to decrease by $36,320. If you do not, If all you make is $360,000 or more, your taxes on average are going to decrease by $7,160. So if you make $360,000 or more, you're fine. You're going to actually get a pretty significant tax cut. Howsoever, if you make $157 per year, or between $157,000 and $360,000 a year, on average, your taxes are going to increase by $610. If you make between $157,500 to $360,000 a year, you're going to see a $610 increase in your taxes. If you make between $28,600 and $157,000. On average, your tax, so that's everybody making 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, $100,000, 110, 120, 130, 140,000, $150,000. Anybody in those tax brackets, because I got to break it down because some of us think we're rich and we ain't rich. We just hood rich. Like we ain't rich at all. We just, we barely hood poor. But if you make between $28,000 on up to $150,000 a year, on average, your taxes are going to increase by over $1,500. If you don't make at least $28,600 a year on average, meaning you make $28,000 and below, you're going to see an increase of $790. $790. So the only people this is going to benefit are the people who are already doing all right. Now, the challenge we have to ask ourselves is, how are you going to afford all the things that it is that you are trying to afford? Because remember, the only reason they want to increase taxes on all the rest of us is because they want to make the tax cuts that they gave the billionaires in the 2017 tax deal, that $1.9 trillion, those were temporary. Those tax cuts for billionaires end this year, 2025. This is one of the reasons why it was very beneficial for elongated muskrat to purchase the presidency, which his son apparently seems to know a whole lot about and keeps slipping out information on a hot mic, telling Donald Trump, "You're not the president. I want you to go away." That little boy told Donald Trump, "I want you to hush your mouth." He said, "You ain't the president." But the reason it was worthwhile for elongated muskrat to spend $250 million, $250 million to purchase a presidency, is because the tax cuts that they got in 2017, that $1.9 trillion in tax cuts, they are going to be expired this year unless the Republicans can get 218 votes in the House and enough. Do they need 60 votes? I think they're going to try to do this under a budget reconciliation, so they wouldn't even need 60 votes in the Senate. And I got to make sure what machinations they're going to use, what mechanism they're going to use to try to get it through in the Senate. Typically, when it comes to policy, you need 60 votes in the Senate, but when it comes to budget reconciliation, they're able to do these things with a simple majority. And since there are 53 Republican senators in the Senate right now, you already see where the math is at. But the House Republicans released their plan yesterday for enacting this sweeping fiscal agenda. They have laid out these initial targets that are going to cut taxes for the billionaires, and it's going to slash spending. Let's talk about the spending that's going to get slashed, because that's where this is really going to land for all of us. And we're going to wrap this up in just a minute. The cuts that they are going to slash include some of the following. $4.5 trillion in new deficits. That's going to be the increase, right? That's going to be where the tax cuts for elongated muskrat and the others are going to be. And I'll remind you that of the 30 some odd trillion dollars in debt that we currently have as a nation right now, 8 trillion of it was achieved during the Donald Trump administration #1. So a quarter of our national debt, that the multiple trillions of dollars, that's on Donald Trump. A quarter of it was incurred during his first administration. But here's what they plan to cut in order to allow elongated muskrat and all the other billionaires to walk away scot-free with these permanent tax cuts and the tax increases for all of you that we described just a second ago. $2 trillion in cuts to healthcare and retirement programs. I'm talking Medicaid. I'm talking Social Security. I'm talking Medicare. I'm talking veterans benefits. $2 trillion in tax cuts. And what's important for us to know about that is that, like, we need those programs, right? We need those programs. When we're talking about Medicaid and Medicare, who's going to make sure that the foster kids of America still have access to healthcare? They rely on Medicaid. Who's going to make sure that your grandmother, who is relying on Social Security, which allocates $65 a day, if you're getting your full Social Security benefits, at best, you're getting by on $65 a day. But if you are a billionaire who is about to get this tax cut, according to some of the reports we heard coming out of the congressional hearings, they're able to survive on $8 million a day. So $8 million a day for elongated muskrat and all the other billionaires, while your grandmama, your granddaddy, your auntie, your uncle, and them are forced to get by on $65 a day. That's where we're at now. I need you all to call your senators. I need you all to call your congressional representatives. I need you to download the Indivisible Guide. The Indivisible Guide is a 28-page PDF that is a revised version of the first Indivisible Guide that's going to allow you basic information on civics, on how government works, and how these votes move forward. Now, we spent on Tuesday, we started unpacking the Indivisible Guide. For those of you who are not yet listening to SiriusXM, I suggest you get a subscription. Hell, we're going to be here another 2 years. Go on and get you a subscription so that you can get all this goodness that exists outside of the YouTube lives that we're doing. Download the 5 Calls app. 5 Calls app. 5 Calls app. Download that app. It's going to make it so easy for you to contact your senators and your congressional representatives. Keep in mind, it does not matter whether you voted for them or not. It does not matter if you are a Democrat and you're represented by a Republican. In fact, bring all the smoke to the Republicans. Call them, talk to their staffers, tell them you can't understand how your grandparents, how people in your life who rely on Social Security are going to be expected to get by on $65 a day, which is going to be cut. Right? That's a part of this deal. That $65 a day is going to be cut. How much less money could the elders in your life survive on? How much less money could the disabled communities, people in your communities survive on, while the freaking billionaires are coasting on $8 million a day? I ain't never seen $1 million in cash in my life. Ain't never seen it. And God has been good to me. So we're in a moment right now where people power is going to have to matter. Otherwise, the Department of Education is gone, Medicaid is gone, Medicare is gone, Veterans Benefits is gone, Social Security is gone. So elongated muskrat and his billionaire boys from the apartheid regime are going to bring their kids into the Resolute desk, into the Oval Office, so they can stick their fingers up their nose and smear their little boogers all over the Resolute desk while they're telling off the technical president of the United States by reminding him, you're not the real president, and I want you to go. All right, that was a lot. We got to get ready to go to commercial break. We are now going to be, I'll take your calls on all of this, of course, but we are also, hi YouTube, we have a book club. And today we are going to begin our breakdown of post-traumatic slave syndrome in the second hour, because that is the book we are reading for this month by Dr. Joy DeGruy. And so in the second hour, in addition to taking your calls about all of this, we are also going to break down post-traumatic slave syndrome, just the intro and the beginnings of chapter 1, because we've taken our time through this. Because in addition to FUBU February, where we're doing everything we can to pause our spending so that before we spend a dime, we ask ourselves, am I able to find this resource, this product, this thing I'm about to buy with a Black-owned vendor? That's the renewing of our mind financially. We're also going to renew our mind when it comes to what we have been experiencing as a people, because we got work to do. Bye, YouTube. Appreciate y'all. Hit the like and subscribe and share and do all the things. Appreciate y'all. And if there are trolls in there, I don't even have time to be paying attention to the chat as much as I would like to be. So I know that there are trolls because I see y'all afterwards. We're going to be here another 2 years. So troll on, bitches, because we ain't leaving. 866-801-8255, 866-801